Chapter 281, Lucius's Abnormality. With 5 minutes until the mascot performance, the box was nearly full, only a few scattered seats left empty. Vincent scanned the crowd and noticed many familiar faces besides Fudge. Lucius Malfoy and his family sat nearby. Fudge had said Lucius had recently donated a large sum to St. Mungo's and had picked up a few tickets that way. Vincent didn't much care how Lucius had gotten them. His attention was on a subtle movement. Lucius would occasionally press his right hand to the inside of his left forearm, as if something there throbbed. If Vincent was right, there should be a dark mark under that arm, the sign of a Death Eater. At the same time, the devil's snare entwined around Vincent's body began to stir restlessly. It, too, seemed to sense the evil aura coming from Lucius. The anomaly left Vincent almost certain of one thing. Lord Voldemort was beginning to move again. He narrowed his eyes and watched the people in the box without showing it. Apart from Lucius, nobody else acted strangely. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ludo Bagman's booming voice carried through the stadium. "Welcome to the final of the 422nd Quidditch World Cup." The match officially began. First, the mascots entered. Bulgaria's mascots were a large group of Vila. The moment they appeared, a roar went up across the stadium. Male wizards in the stands wore obvious, smitten expressions. Some even stood, leaning as if they might climb the rail and rush down. Ministry staff were forced to use spells to hold them back. Even the dignitaries in Vincent's box were fidgeting. Who had expected Vila to appear? Vincent wasn't affected. It wasn't simply willpower. He'd met Vila before. Once he'd been dazzled, then that Vila had suddenly sprouted an ugly, bird-like head with a sharp beak, the unmistakable sign of an angry Vila. From then on, whenever he saw them, his first thought was of that bird's head. Harry sat beside him, eyes glazed, his body leaning forward as if wanting to surge down. Vincent pressed a hand to Harry's shoulder and whispered to Hermione, "Hermione, hold him back." Hermione acted immediately. "What's the matter?" she asked. "It's the Vila," Vincent said simply. "Any man seeing them for the first time finds it hard to resist. It's a kind of charm." Hermione gave Harry a sharp slap. "Thank you, Hermione," Harry mumbled, covering his face as the daze cleared. "You're welcome," she said, sweetly satisfied, then glanced at Ron. He was worse than Harry. His head was almost sticking over the box rail, and Mrs. Weasley was tugging him back, embarrassed. The commotion died down quickly. When the music stopped, everyone returned to themselves. Ireland's mascots followed, a crowd of leprechauns in bright green, merrily flinging coins into the stands. Sharp-eyed folk noticed something odd. No wizard, however wealthy, would throw away money like that. "Those are leprechaun gold," Vincent reminded Ron, who had been stooping to pick up a coin. "They're fake. They'll disappear in 2 hours." Ron blinked, realizing everyone was watching him with amused, perhaps slightly mocking expressions. "You're such a cutie, little Ronnie," Fred called from the next box. "Oh, I knew that, of course. I just wanted to see," Ron muttered, embarrassed, and tossed the coin aside. The box filled with good-natured laughter. Once the mascots finished, the match began in earnest. Ireland and Bulgaria clashed in a fierce, fast contest. Harry kept the binoculars Cedric had given him glued to his face. Reluctantly, he admitted they were useful. In slow-motion replay, he could see the players' graceful, brutal precision. Though they rode the same model firebolts as he did, they were faster and more agile. If he'd faced Crumb, he knew he'd lose. But Vincent's eyes stayed on Lucius Malfoy. Lucius kept fidgeting with his forearm. It wasn't reaction to the play. After a few words with his wife Narcissa, Lucius stood and left the box. Vincent noted it calmly, but didn't follow. A few minutes later, Lucius returned, expression serene, as if he'd only gone to relieve himself. "You sense something, don't you?" Vincent murmured to the devil's snare hidden within him. A tendril of the snare extended beneath his sleeve, angling toward Lucius. That confirmed it. Lucius had done something tied to the dark arts during his absence. Lucius seemed to notice Vincent's gaze and turned. Their eyes met, and Vincent gave a polite smile. Lucius didn't return it. He looked past Vincent at the pitch. In that instant, though, Vincent caught a flicker of something. Sympathy, perhaps, masked quickly by Malfoy composure. Vincent made a small, private shake of his head. Something interesting might come of this. The final was tense. Bulgaria started poorly and kept slipping behind as the game went on. The commentators narrated the decline. The Bulgarians made mistakes, struggled to keep up, and fell further behind as the half went on. Then the moment everyone had waited for. Crumb caught the golden snitch. The crowd erupted. The commentator's voice soared over the din. The match is over. The score is 107 to 160. Ireland wins. What a pity. Although Crumb caught the snitch and earned 150 points, his team had fallen too far behind to recover. Chapter 282, The Burning Cabin. The match was over. The crowd began to stream back to camp, and Harry walked with them, still buzzing from the game. "Did you see the Bulgarian seeker's final dive?" he asked, waving his hands. "That move was incredible. Maybe I could try something like it." "That's Crumb," Ron said, cheeks flushed from excitement. "He's a professional. His skill isn't even in the same league as ours. Don't set yourself up to compare, Harry. Don't push it." "Wood's on a professional team too," Harry said, not entirely convinced. He joined Puddlemere. "Only as a substitute," Ron answered, then changed the subject. "You don't want to play professional Quidditch someday, do you?" Professional Quidditch. Harry thought it over. Maybe it wasn't a bad idea. He pictured Crumb. Ron said he was still a student, like Harry, and tried to imagine himself diving for a snitch in a match like that. No way, he told himself. He wasn't that good yet. By early morning, they had all returned to the Weasley tent. Though its exterior looked ordinary and a little shabby, the inside had been expanded with an undetectable extension charm. The interior was warm and homely, just like the burrow. Mr. Weasley must have borrowed furnishings from a colleague. Conversation naturally turned back to the match. Outside, the Irish wizards had formed an exuberant procession to celebrate their victories, and every so often loud cheering and the clang of music drifted past. A drunken dwarf even stumbled into the tent at one point. Mrs. Weasley's gnome-handling spell promptly hurled him back out, which made Ron wish the Bulgarian team's mascot had been the one to wander in. Everyone was in high spirits, yet Professor Wisen moved like a man who could not relax. He stepped out of the tent now and then, peering into the night. In the original course of events, Death Eaters had caused chaos that morning, but the plot had already been altered. Peter Pettigrew was still in Azkaban, and Dumbledore had said the Dementors had left him a walking corpse. Professor Wisen had assumed a full-scale Death Eater parade wouldn't happen. Still, Lucius Malfoy's odd behavior at the match had kept him on edge. He knew anything was possible. When he came back inside this time, Hermione noticed his unease. "Professor Wisen?" She leaned over and whispered, "You look worried." "Just a premonition," he murmured. "There may be trouble later. Dangerous people have infiltrated the area. We should be ready." Vincent's voice wasn't low. Everyone heard him and heads turned. "Trouble?" Mr. Weasley scoffed. "Why would you think that, Vincent? No one bad will get in here. The Ministry's security is excellent, I'm sure." Boom! A huge explosion cut him off. Everyone jumped from chairs and sofas. Mrs. Weasley's face drained of color. The bang had come from very close by. "We should go and see," Professor Wisen said, his voice tight, and he hurried outside. They spilled into the night. Not far away, Professor Vincent's small wooden cabin was engulfed in violent flames, the blaze painting the surrounding tents a terrible red. "Merlin's beard!" Mr. Weasley cried and drew his wand. "Aguamenti!" A thick jet of water shot from his wand and struck the inferno. Others raised their wands and sent water as well, but it was useless. The flames did not abate. "That's dark arts fire," Charlie said grimly. "Not fiend fire, but similar in resistance. Normal water spells won't do anything." Professor Wisen, by contrast, moved slowly and deliberately. He took out a long, oddly textured wand, the firewood wand, raised it, and a brilliant red light bloomed at its tip. The wild flames seemed to slither and gather like snakes, drawn toward the wand head until they were absorbed into it. The last of the blaze vanished. It was too late for the cabin, however. All that remained was a charred ruin, and the air smelled sharply of smoke and burnt wood. "Who did this?" Mr. Weasley thundered, but of course no answer came. Vincent approached the blackened doorway with a face set like stone. He had steeled himself for the worst, but anger still throbbed in him. Whoever had lit this fire had clearly meant to kill him. Had anyone been in the cabin, they would now be ash. "They're not dead yet," a hoarse voice called from the shadows. Everyone turned. Two figures in black robes and hooded cloaks stood nearby, wands in hand. "Who are you?" Mr. Weasley began. "Watch out!" Professor Vincent shouted, but the warning was barely in time. Avada Kedavra! Two sickly green beams lanced out. One aimed straight for Professor Vincent, the other streaked toward Harry. Vincent moved with astonishing speed. He twisted aside. The green light grazed his robes and blasted a smoking pit into the ground behind him. He threw up a hand. Protego! And an invisible shield flashed into being in front of Harry, but the killing curse hit with such force that the barrier shattered like glass. At the same instant, Harry rolled to the side. The curse grazed his shoulder and slammed into a large tree, blackening the bark. "Harry!" Ron cried, horrified. "Stupefy!" came a voice, and Expelliarmus, barked another. The two spells, one from Vincent, the other from Harry, who had already whipped his wand from his belt, cut through the night and struck the two attackers squarely. The assailants staggered, startled. Vincent had expected to fight, but Harry's reflexes were not what anyone would have expected from an ordinary student. His speed in counterattacking was startling. Chapter 283, Riot and the Dark Mark. The two dark wizards raised their wands and threw up shield charms, but the incoming curses ripped through their defenses as if they weren't there. Harry's Stupefy glanced off, but Vincent's Expelliarmus hit dead center. Whoosh! The other wizard's wand flew out of his hand, arcing through the air until Vincent caught it cleanly. The disarmed man dropped to his knees, eyes wide with disbelief. "We failed! Retreat!" he cried. His companion seized his arm, and with a twist and a loud crack, the two of them vanished in an instant. "Damn it, they got away," Mr. Weasley muttered, annoyed. Harry sagged to the ground, panting, fingers trembling. Only because of Vincent's relentless training had he reflexively countered, otherwise he would have been hit. He had come within a hair's breadth of death. He could still taste the residue of it, the chill that clung to the very idea of the killing curse, colder and more absolute than any Dementor. Vincent knelt at his side and put an arm around his shoulders. "Are you all right, Harry?" Harry took a deep breath and forced his voice steady. "I'm fine, Professor." Vincent's presence steadied him. The trembling eased and Harry pushed himself up. He felt oddly calm, as if brushing so close to death had stripped away panic. "Who were they? Why did they attack us?" "They had their hoods up. Nobody saw their faces," Vincent said, drawing out the wand he had seized. "Ebony, dragon heartstring, 14 inches. Maybe someone will recognize it." "Ollivander!" Fred and George exclaimed at the same time. "That's what I was thinking," Vincent said, tucking the wand into his robe. "Mr. Ollivander could identify any wand he sold." "Give it to the Ministry," Mr. Weasley suggested. "I will," Vincent agreed, expression even. "But first I want to find out who destroyed my tent. They owe me a small fortune in galleons and emotional damages." Mr. Weasley had no answer to that. Before anyone could respond, a new wave of chaos swept the campsite. Explosions boomed from the far tents, followed by screams. People came pouring from the burning canvas. Flames licked the night. Then a green flare raced upward and burst against the darkness. Everyone looked up. A giant skull formed in the sky, venomous black eyes and a serpent pouring from its mouth, writhing across the heavens. Vincent shrugged as if to himself. "Well, that answers who started the riot." Harry stared up, frowning. His scar throbbed, a hot spike of pain. He realized with a cold certainty that his head only hurt like this in the presence of Voldemort or things connected to him. "The dark mark," Mr. Weasley said, voice unsteady. "You know whose symbol." "Let's go see," Vincent ordered. After a quick argument, Mrs. Weasley reluctantly agreed to let the adults investigate, staying behind in a safer spot with Ginny while the rest moved toward the source of the signal. They picked their way through smoke and panic, wands gripped tightly. Burning tents lit the night in sickly orange. Hooded figures drifted through the fleeing crowd, slipping away when approached. Clearly scouts, familiar with keeping out of sight when discovered. Nobody managed to stop them. The group pressed on toward the edge of the campsite where the dark mark had appeared. A crowd had already gathered there, 20-30 people, drawn by the ominous sign in the sky. Vincent recognized a number of faces, Cornelius Fudge among them, as well as Ludo Bagman. Fudge looked pale and sweat beaded on his forehead. The scene was a catastrophe for the Ministry and for the reputation of the Quidditch World Cup. "Vincent," Fudge greeted him without enthusiasm, moving forward. "You were here?" "What happened, Minister?" Mr. Weasley asked, nodding at the mark above them. No one knows, Fudge said irritably. Someone left the mark to cause trouble. There was nobody here when we arrived. There were dark wizards in the camp, Vincent said calmly. 2 of them burned my tent and tried to use the killing curse on Harry and me. We were lucky to get help. Fudge went a shade paler. The killing curse? You aren't mistaken? Not at all, Mr. Weasley said through clenched teeth. How dare they? A cold voice cut through the crowd from the rear. Is this true? People parted as Barty Crouch pushed forward, his expression severe. As head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation and the official responsible for the cup, he was bracing for the fallout. Did you see the attacker's face, Mr. Vincent? Crouch asked, eyes hard. He wore a hood, Vincent replied, shrugging. Even the most reckless know to hide themselves when they're about to do something wicked. He produced the disarmed wand and held it up. Chapter 284, Mr. Crabbe and Devil's Snare's New Ability. When Vincent spoke, every eye in the crowd snapped to the wand in his hand. A wand often stands in for a person's identity, and that made the wand's ownership suddenly crucial. Fudge seemed to think of something and called toward the gathered crowd. Mr. Ollivander, are you here? Vincent felt a sudden lightness. Ollivander, the old wand maker, must be at least 80 or 90 by now. He had always been obsessed with wands and showed little interest in Quidditch. Would he really have come? The crowd parted, and 2 figures stepped forward. One was Ollivander himself. The other, a middle-aged man in his 40s or 50s, had the same narrow face and sharp eyes, obviously his son. Mr. Ollivander? Vincent said in surprise. I didn't expect you to be interested in Quidditch. I never said that, Ollivander replied with a small smile. Someone sent me tickets, and my son thought it might give me new inspiration. And I must admit, these young people's sports have given me a few ideas about wands. Vincent had no idea what Quidditch and wandcraft had to do with each other, but that wasn't important right now. Fudge supported Ollivander forward and put the old man in front of Vincent. Do you still remember this wand? He asked. Vincent handed the seized wand over. Ollivander took it, turned it over in his thin fingers, and nodded almost at once. Ebony, dragon heartstring, 14 inches, he said. I remember it clearly. This was 40 years ago. Who owned it? Fudge asked quickly. Crabbe, Ollivander answered simply, then handed the wand back to Vincent. A chill spread through the group. Ollivander never lied about wands. The Crabbe family, one of 28 old pureblood families, had a certain reputation. A fat Slytherin boy sprang unbidden to Vincent's mind. Ollivander could not have meant Vincent Crabbe, who was still at Hogwarts. This had to be his father. It was him, Mr. Weasley snapped. That man was a Death Eater. He hasn't changed. He turned to Fudge. Minister, it's clear. This was Death Eater work. We should detain Crabbe at once. Fudge shook his head slowly. We all know that a wand doesn't prove everything, he said firmly. Maybe someone stole Mr. Crabbe's wand, used it to make the dark mark, and tried to frame him. You know who is dead. That's an established fact, and Crabbe has reformed. Vincent let out a short, bitter laugh in his mind. Fudge was denying what he feared. If this were officially classified as a return of Death Eater activity and Crabbe was implicated, it would open a can of worms. Many former Death Eaters lived openly in society now, and investigating them all would be a political nightmare. Better, from Fudge's point of view, to call it the work of some ordinary dark wizard and avoid panic. You know the truth in your heart, Minister, Vincent said. Lord Voldemort is back. Nonsense, Fudge bristled. You know who has been dead for a long time. That's a fact the Ministry has confirmed. Then why did they summon the Dark Mark? Mr. Weasley demanded. Because it causes panic, Fudge snapped, impatient. The Dark Mark doesn't have to mean Death Eaters were involved. If someone wanted to, they could paint one on their robes. It isn't difficult. Vincent's jaw tightened. The Dark Mark wasn't merely a painted symbol. It was the result of the spell Morse Mordra, a magical brand that allowed Death Eaters and Voldemort to locate one another. The mark hovering above the campsite now was the genuine thing. Barty Crouch, who had been silent the whole time, seemed about to speak, but Fudge waved him off. All right, everyone disperse, Fudge announced to the onlookers. The Ministry will provide a reasonable explanation. We will investigate thoroughly until we find the real culprit. People drifted away in small groups, many with anxious faces. Fudge's reassurances had not calmed them. Eventually, only Vincent and his party and the ministry officials remained. Fudge turned to Vincent. "Is there anything else?" "We at least have to find Mr. Crab," Vincent said. "His wand is still in my hand. If it was stolen, I need to ask him myself. Besides, I lost a tent because of this." Fudge sighed. "To be honest, Vincent, Lucius told me earlier that Mr. Crab didn't even come to the World Cup. He's supposed to be traveling in France." Vincent was surprised. Fudge was not the sort to lie lightly. Still, he smiled. "That's not necessarily true. I bet he's near the campsite. Let's go find him. It won't take long, 20 minutes. "How will you find him?" Fudge frowned. "The campsite is huge. Are you going to search every tent?" Vincent tossed the ebony wand lightly and caught it, then said, "Leave it to me." At that, vines of devil's snare slid from under Vincent's robes and wrapped themselves around the wand. Type, devil's characteristics, intelligence, parasitism, magic perception. Magic perception, a new ability Devil's Snare had only recently acquired. It allowed the plant to sense magical traces on objects it touched. Every wizard's magical signature is unique, and an often used wand becomes saturated with its owner's imprint. With magic perception, Devil's Snare could read that imprint and trace it back to its source. Once the vines closed on the wand, more tendrils stretched into the air and formed an arrow. "Let's go," Vincent said. He led the way, ministry officials trailing behind. Mr. Weasley, after a brief talk with Vincent, decided to take his family back to camp. Molly would be worried, and they couldn't be away long. The group moved off, following the silent, living arrow. Chapter 285, Death Eaters and Crab's Explosion. Following the guidance of the Devil's Snare, Vincent led Minister Fudge and his entourage across an open clearing and at last into a dense green wood. "Vincent, this is a complete waste of time," Fudge huffed behind him. "I'm sure Crab isn't here. He probably just lost his wand." "Do you really think so?" Vincent answered, then suddenly stopped and whispered, "Look over there." Everyone followed his gaze. A dozen black-robed figures stood in a circle, and in the center knelt a man writhing in agony. One sleeve was rolled up, and the dark mark glowed an eerie green on his forearm. Fudge went instantly pale. "That's a Death Eater gathering," Barty Crouch snapped, already drawing his wand. The Death Eaters noticed them at the same moment. Vincent drew his wand as well, preparing for a fight, but the expected exchange never came. The Death Eaters produced their wands in unison, and before Vincent or the others could react, apparated away. All that remained were a few soft pops and wisps of black smoke, and the kneeling man. They hurried over. The man's face was horribly distorted. When they recognized him as Crab, the owner of the wand Vincent had taken earlier, their stomachs dropped. He lay curled on the ground convulsing, his features twisted almost beyond recognition. His fingernails clawed at the dirt, white foam leaked from the corners of his mouth, and inhuman growls tore from his throat. "I made a mistake. Save me," he croaked. He collapsed in a final shuddering heap and lay unmoving. Crouch forced open his eyelids and examined him, face grim. "It's the mark of the Cruciatus curse. This looks like it's been going on for some time." "Is he still alive?" Fudge demanded. Crouch shook his head. The answer was obvious. "How cruel," Vincent said softly. "He must have slipped up, and Lord Voldemort punished him. Poor man." "There is no Lord Voldemort," Fudge blurted, voice shaking. This is just an internal matter among dark wizards." Crab's body gave a grotesque twitch. His mouth opened at an impossible angle, and a cold, rasping voice came from him. "We will meet again, Vincent." Before anyone could react, Crab's body ballooned with an awful sound. Boom! He exploded in a spray of blood and tissue, splattering the surrounding trees and ground. At the last instant, Vincent threw up a shield charm that kept the worst of it off himself. He flicked his wand once more and said quietly, "Minister, you should accept the facts. I don't think anyone besides Lord Voldemort would be this cruel." Fudge said nothing. He pressed his palm to his forehead and stared at the ground. He was clearly not prepared to accept what he had seen. Vincent sighed. The sight had been pitiful. Barty Crouch stood a little apart, calmer than the others, an inscrutable light in his eyes. Crab's violent end had actually spared Vincent some trouble. He had intended only to send Crab to Azkaban. Voldemort's methods, however, were far more final. A loyal follower punished so severely for a small error What did that say about those who still followed him? Crouch's expression suggested he was already considering that question, but this was no time for pondering. While ministry men dealt with the remains, Vincent returned to the camp. The disturbance appeared to be over. Aside from a few burned tents and some injured folk, there had been no mass slaughter. It seemed the Death Eaters had meant only to intimidate. When Vincent reached the location of the Weasleys' tent, he found it mostly packed up. Mr. Weasley and Harry were still there, pacing. The others were gone. "Where did everyone go?" Vincent called. They hurried over at once. Mr. Weasley let out a long breath. "I sent the others back. There was an emergency portkey window opened early. As for Harry, he wouldn't leave. He was worried about you and insisted on waiting." Vincent patted Harry's shoulder. Harry forced a smile, but kept one hand pressed to the wound on his forehead. The pain that had started earlier hadn't eased. Seeing that, Vincent's face tightened. Among the Death Eaters they'd met, Voldemort himself might have been among them, though not resurrected in flesh, but probably possessing someone else, as he had with Quirrell once. Whatever the case, Vincent believed Voldemort would eventually return by whatever means he could. "Did you find anything?" Mr. Weasley asked, and Vincent told them everything. The dozen-strong Death Eater group, the Dark Mark, and Crabbe's convulsions and final explosion. "Crabbe was a Death Eater," Mr. Weasley said with a bitter snort. "He got what he deserved." A complicated tangle of emotion passed through Harry. He thought of his old Slytherin classmate Vincent Crabbe, the boy who had always shadowed Malfoy, and felt for a beat an odd sympathy. It evaporated almost as quickly. These were Death Eaters. Their hands were stained. Who had felt sorry when his parents were killed? Near midnight, Mr. Call, Weasley procured an old tire-shaped portkey from the administrator and took Vincent and Harry back to the burrow. Mrs. Weasley, who had been waiting anxiously in the yard, visibly relaxed when they arrived safely. With that, the disturbance was officially over. At Mrs. Weasley's insistence, they sat down to a proper breakfast. The Daily Prophet arrived punctually, dropped on the table by the Weasley's owl. Vincent picked it up and skimmed it, eyebrows rising at how quickly the paper had reported the Quidditch World Cup. Everyone clustered around as Hermione read the headline aloud. "Death Eater mark appears at Quidditch World Cup site." "Who wrote this? So fast!" Hermione exclaimed. "It's Rita Skeeter," Vincent said with a frown. "If she wrote it, take it with a grain of salt." Chapter 286, News and Apparition. That afternoon, Vincent came back home. The Daily Prophet had been running Quidditch World Cup coverage for days, and under Rita Skeeter's meddling, the reports had become ridiculous. Shocking. Ministry of Magic hides the truth. Is there more to the Dark Mark? Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, exposed for financial dealings with dark wizards. Ministry official caught cheating on his lover during Quidditch final night. The last item even carried a photograph, two naked figures fleeing a burning tent, delicately blurred in the necessary places. Vincent's mouth twitched. For Rita Skeeter to dig up something like that amid all the chaos proved how formidable she was. Even more astonishing, it seemed she'd written most of the paper herself. It made him wonder whether the Prophet simply leaned on her as its star reporter. By contrast, Ireland's victory was buried in a small column. As he'd expected, the paper left out Crabbe's name, and the phrase Death Eater was almost absent. The Ministry had pinned the disturbance on two ordinary dark wizards, no mention of Death Eaters, making the whole incident look like a clumsy prank. The cover-up had been thorough. Even Rita couldn't pry anything useful out of it. Vincent felt helpless. He hadn't expected much from the Ministry, but this degree of obfuscation surprised him. Who had caused the disturbance that night? What was Lord Voldemort's condition now? He had no answers and could only wait. With the World Cup over, only a week remained before Hogwarts reopened. Ever since that killing curse had brushed past him, Harry felt he'd changed in some vague way, though he couldn't say how. One thing was certain, the coming months would not be peaceful. Voldemort was on the move again, and everyone needed to be ready. The last week of summer slipped away quickly. On the morning of September 1st, Privet Drive was wrapped in misty rain. Vincent apparated Harry and Hermione, who was staying with them for the time being, to King's Cross Station himself. He didn't want to get soaked. When they arrived at platform 9 3/4, the platform was nearly empty, only a few scattered figures huddled against the weather. "Get on the train," Vincent said. "I'm going to Hogwarts another way. Dumbledore says he has something to tell me." "What is it?" Harry asked. "Who knows?" Vincent shrugged. "The headmaster does like to keep people guessing." Harry and Hermione boarded the Hogwarts Express. As expected, the carriages were still sparse. They picked a compartment toward the back and sat down. Hermione produced a copy of Apparition, Theory and Essentials, and started reading with the sort of concentration she always reserved for homework. "You're already studying Apparition?" Harry asked, surprised. "We're not old enough, are we?" "I know," she murmured, "but there's no harm preparing. Like at the World Cup, if something happens, Apparition might be the fastest way out." Harry thought of the chaos outside the campsite and nodded. "Whatever you do, though, don't try it on your own," he said seriously. "Underage apparition is illegal and traceable by the Ministry, and it's dangerous. You can get splinched. Imagine only part of you moving." "It sounds awful," Hermione said. "I tried it once this summer," Harry admitted. He hadn't told her before. "My teacher lent me his wand, and I gave it a go." "What happened?" Hermione asked, intrigued. Harry sighed. "It took my teacher ages to put me back together." "At least you lived," Hermione said, flustered with sympathy. Harry shrugged. It wasn't simply about surviving. The image of one's top half materializing somewhere else while the lower half stayed behind was terrible enough. The compartment door slid open and Ron pushed in, out of breath, his red hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. "This rain's dreadful," he complained as he sat down. "I was waving at you outside the window. How did you not see me?" He shook water from his hair, splattering droplets everywhere. Hermione recoiled. The train began to move with a steady clack of wheels on track. "Oh, I nearly missed it," Ron said, relieved. "Hope George and Fred didn't get left behind." Before a second passed, the door opened again, and two identical redheads poked their wet faces in. "Our little Ronnie's worried about us," George teased, pretending to wipe away a tear. "How touching," Fred added, slinging an arm over Ron and deliberately rubbing rain into his hair. Ron scowled. "Get lost!" The twins laughed and squeezed into the compartment, thoroughly soaked. Harry suddenly remembered something and asked, "Did you two win much from that bet at the World Cup?" He remembered the Weasley twins had staked everything with Ludo Bagman, 37 galleons, 15 sickles, 3 nuts, and a fake wand valued at 5 galleons, on the unlikely outcome of Bulgaria catching the snitch while Ireland won. Both Fred and George's faces fell. "Don't even mention it," Fred said bitterly. "That bloke's a cheat. Bagman never meant to pay." "But he's the head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports," Hermione said, bewildered. "How could he?" "We found out later," George said. "He's an old gambler, owes gulps to goblins, can't cover his losses." George produced a crumpled scrap of parchment from his pocket. "Look," he said, handing it over. "It was a check, bounced." Ron leaned in. "There isn't even a date on it." "That's the point," Fred said helplessly. Harry looked at the twins with sympathy. That money was probably gone for good. Chapter 287, Return to School and Thestrals. After a long journey, the Hogwarts Express finally pulled into Hogsmeade Station in the evening. Rain hammered down, a streaming curtain that soaked the platform and stung their faces until it was almost impossible to keep their eyes open. "This bloody weather," Ron complained, trying in vain to shelter his head with his robes. Fortunately, they were already at Hogwarts. Hermione flicked her wand and cast 3 quick imperturbable charms. A transparent dome unfurled over their heads and kept the deluge off them. "When did you learn that?" Ron asked, staring up at the floating barrier. "They don't teach that in class, do they?" He jabbed a hand at the dome, and it passed straight through. It kept out only the rain. "I learned it over the summer," Hermione said, triumphant. "Professor Wisen knows a lot of practical everyday spells." Harry glanced around. Older students had all sorts of ways to keep dry. Some had turned their wands into umbrellas, others used charms like Hermione's. A few Slytherins had even conjured a small dark cloud and were following certain Gryffindors, raining only on them. "How childish," Hermione sniffed. She aimed her wand at the cloud, a flash of golden light, and it changed into a puff of pink cotton candy, drawing a ripple of laughter. At the edge of the crowd, Harry noticed Draco Malfoy, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, sheltered beneath a luxurious black and gold umbrella. Malfoy hadn't come to cause trouble today, which seemed odd. Crabbe, however, looked dazed and distant, his eyes blank, as if he were somewhere else. Poor fellow, Harry thought. Crabbe must have heard something about his father, but whether he knew the whole truth was unclear. "Come on, Harry," Ron called from one of the carriages. "What are you doing?" "Coming," Harry said, and walked toward the thestral-drawn carriages waiting nearby. One of the thestrals lifted its head as he approached. Harry could see them. He'd seen them before in Care of Magical Creatures. And this one stepped forward and nudged his hand with its cold muzzle. Its breath was chill against his skin. "It likes you," an ethereal voice said from the rain. Luna Lovegood stood a little apart, her silver hair plastered to her cheeks, her wide eyes fixed on Harry. "Luna, why aren't you getting in the carriage?" he asked. "Want me to put an imperturbable charm up for you?" "Oh no," she smiled. "I like the smell of rain. It smells like the moon." Harry had no idea what the moon smelled like, but he suspected they should be boarding. Luna, though, didn't hurry. After a moment, she added, almost conversationally, "You know, thestrals become friendlier to those who've been closer to death. They like the smell of it." "What?" Harry blinked. "Who told you that?" "No one," Luna said, shaking her head. "It's just what I think. Goodbye." She turned and walked away, leaving Harry a little bewildered. "Hey, what are you standing there for?" Ron's voice came from inside the carriage, sharp with impatience. Harry clambered in. Luna was odd, he thought. Perhaps the rumors were right. The carriage rolled toward the castle through the downpour. Harry stared at the rain and worried about the first years. They'd had to cross the Black Lake in little boats. What if one had capsized in weather like this? The carriage eased to a stop at the castle steps, and the students climbed out. Professor McGonagall stood in the doorway of the Great Hall. "Go on in, everyone," she called, flicking her wand so that everyone's robes dried and warmed, and the raindrops slid from their hair. The Great Hall was, as ever, a familiar sight. Floating candles, the long house tables, a ceiling like a night sky. Harry's eyes went automatically to the staff table. The professors were already seated, and Vincent was there. Beside him sat an unfamiliar man, a middle-aged wizard whose most striking feature was a bright blue artificial eye that twitched constantly. His face was streaked with scars, and his nose looked like it had been badly damaged. He had a harsh, weathered look. "Did you see him?" Harry whispered to Ron. "The new professor. He's got a fake eye." Ron squinted, then recognition dawned. "Oh, Moody. Mad-Eye Moody." Before Harry could ask who Moody was, the Great Hall doors opened again, and McGonagall ushered in a group of shivering first-years soaked to the bone. Their lips were blue with cold. Some of the smaller children trembled. Hermione frowned. They must have had trouble on the lake. McGonagall wasted no time. With a few precise wand movements, she dried their clothes and smoothed their hair. When they looked presentable, she led them to the front of the hall for the sorting. Vincent rose from his place at the staff table, carried a three-legged stool to the front, and set the patched sorting hat upon it. Dumbledore had entrusted Vincent with the sorting this year, and though Vincent had half expected some urgent reason for being called back, sorting the first years was better than just sitting and clapping at the staff table. "Ahem," Vincent said. "So now, all first-year students." "Hey," the sorting hat's voice piped up, surly. "Did you forget something? I haven't sung yet." "Oh, right. Please go ahead," Vincent said, giving the hat a rueful look as the first soft notes of its song began to ripple through the hall. Chapter 288. It's fine. I have an antidote ready. That was over 1,000 years ago, when I was first woven into being by 4 famous wizards whose names are still remembered today. When the sorting hat finished its song, enthusiastic applause broke out in the Great Hall. Vincent nodded once and unrolled the parchment. "Next, whoever I call, please come forward and put on the hat. Yes, don't be shy. It's that one right there. The hat will announce your house, and then please take your place at the appropriate table. Stuart Ackerley, Ravenclaw, Malcolm Baddock, Slytherin, Dennis Creevey. Oh, are you related to Mr. Colin Creevey?" The thin boy in the rat fur coat nodded timidly. He'd taken an accidental swim in the Black Lake, and Hagrid had lent him his clothes. "Good, welcome." Vincent set the sorting hat on his head. "Gryffindor." A cheer erupted at the Gryffindor table. Colin Creevey jumped up wildly, waving at his brother. When the last first year had been sorted, Dumbledore rose, smiling as he opened his arms. "Welcome. Welcome back to Hogwarts," he boomed. "Before we enjoy our dinner, I have an announcement to make. We are delighted to welcome a new professor to our staff. Professor Alastor Moody will be teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts this year." Moody rose. His magical eye rotated and fixed on Harry for a few seconds before sweeping onward. Harry felt a prickling down his spine. Polite, nervous applause rippled around the hall. Moody's appearance put many students on edge. Dumbledore went on, "There are a few more important announcements best made after dinner. Now," he clapped his hands, and an extravagant feast piled onto the tables. "Enjoy! This is what I've been waiting for." Ron whooped, grabbing a roasted chicken leg and shoving it into his mouth. Hermione scowled at him, then glanced around. "Aren't you curious what Dumbledore's going to announce?" Harry had his own guesses. The Triwizard Tournament, perhaps. The feast was as lavish as ever. For some reason, though, 3/4 of the plate in front of Vincent was potatoes, every kind the house elves could think of. The house elves had clearly labored over them. Mashed, pan-fried baby potatoes, rosemary roasted potatoes. They were still potatoes. Vincent discreetly nudged a plate aside. "No thanks, I don't eat," Moody muttered, his magical eye still sweeping the room. "This stuff could be poisoned." "It's fine, I have an antidote ready." Vincent raised an eyebrow and produced a small crystal vial from his sleeve. Moody fell silent for a beat. Who carried an antidote to dinner? He'd been about to think it over when Moody's own instincts clicked in. "You carry an antidote with you?" he said with a hint of approval. "Alert enough, lad." "Oh, thank you." Vincent smiled, shook the vial, and drank it down. "Tastes pretty good, actually. Apple. I put a bit of honey in it." Professor Snape, sitting a little down the table, let out a cold snort. "Tiresome," he said. "Allow me to remind you, a proper potion doesn't need all those unnecessary additives." "Don't be like that, Professor Snape." Vincent unhurriedly produced another small bottle. "Want some? This one's blueberry, mint leaves too." Snape's mouth twitched and he turned his head away. Who would drink an antidote like a refreshment for no reason? People on different paths seldom trusted one another. Moody's gaze fixed on the back of Snape's head, his wooden leg tapping the floor. He muttered under his breath, "Death Eater." The words hit the great hall like a splinter. Professor McGonagall's teacup hovered midair. Flitwick gasped, and even Dumbledore paused for a moment. They were all grown wizards who knew better than to make a scene, so the tension lasted only a moment before things settled. Snape's features grew grim. He seemed to be thinking hard. Moody, however, appeared to have warmed to Vincent. "I've heard," Moody murmured to Vincent, "that Dumbledore thinks highly of you. He considers you a possible successor." Vincent nearly spat out his pumpkin juice. Who had started that rumor? Moody didn't notice his discomfort and continued on. "Tonks mentions you often, too, says you're powerful." "Tonks?" Vincent blinked. "What does she have to do with?" "She trained under me," Moody cut in. "She graduated and became an Auror this year." "Oh, congratulations to her," Vincent said, forcing a smile. Moody grunted and took a long pull from his flask. The comment set Vincent's mind turning. He slipped a silent query to the Tree of Wisdom. "Name, Alastor Moody. No traces of Polyjuice Potion detected." Relief flooded him. In the original timeline, Moody would be replaced this term by Barty Crouch Jr., but it seemed that either the time for the switch hadn't come or Vincent's presence had altered the story. In any case, this was the real Alastor Moody. At last, the plates and platters vanished, and everyone's attention drifted back to Dumbledore. He rose to share a smaller piece of news first. Mr. Filch had expanded the list of banned items in the castle. The list now contained 437 items. "Blast!" someone exclaimed. Fred glanced at George. "Looks like our plans need adjusting." "Ah, yes, I have just the idea." George fixed a lecherous grin on Mr. Filch at the staff table. It looked like Argus Filch was in for an eventful semester. Chapter 289, Give My Regards to Your Father. After dealing with all the smaller announcements, Dumbledore spread his arms and boomed. Following friendly consultations with Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, and with the support of the Ministry's Department of International Magical Cooperation and Department of Magical Games and Sports, we have decided to reinstate an ancient and glorious tradition, the Tri-Wizard Tournament. The Great Hall exploded into noise and speculation. Most of the students had already guessed as much. The Daily Prophet had leaked the news, but the roar of excitement was just as loud. Dumbledore raised a hand for silence. I believe you should be familiar with some of the Tri-Wizard rules. If not, Professor Flitwick has prepared a full explanation. Flitwick sprang up, as if at once eager and embarrassed. He hopped down and hurried to the center of the hall, clutching a large sheet of parchment. One copy for each of you. Please read it carefully. He smiled and flicked his wand. The parchment multiplied into hundreds of copies and fluttered toward the house tables like a swarm of butterflies. Harry caught one and read the title in flourished script. Tri-Wizard Tournament Rules. Explanation. Dense, tiny print filled the page. Everyone began skimming. The winner receives 1,000 galleons, someone shouted. Ron's eyes went wide as he stared at the figure. Maybe I could. Don't even think about it, Hermione said flatly, dousing his fantasy. The minimum age is 17. Can't I at least dream? Ron muttered, still staring at the alluring sum. Vincent, who'd also gotten a copy, skimmed it quickly and found the rules weren't much different from the old version. The next day, Hogwarts buzzed with talk of the tournament. Only one student would represent each school, so everyone wondered who would be chosen. Cedric Diggory quickly became the favorite at Hufflepuff. Other houses pushed their own candidates. Some even suspected Harry might be selected, despite being underage. Dumbledore kept the selection method secret and left the students to speculate. Classes, however, went on. That morning, the first Care of Magical Creatures lesson of the term was due to start. Slytherin and Gryffindor were combined. Vincent waited for his students by the Black Lake when Hagrid came rushing up, dragging a huge wooden crate. Want the students to meet these little fellows? Hagrid cried, throwing up the lid. These are. Vincent peered into the box and frowned. The creatures inside crawled like shelled lobsters, monstrous, almost headless, with scores of legs splayed every which way. Blast-ended scroots, Hagrid crowed. I bred 'em from a manticore and 60 fire crabs. Aren't they splendid? Vincent didn't ask what had happened to that manticore. He did know, without needing to be told, that those grotesque things were completely unsuitable for students. I'm sure they're fascinating, Hagrid, but I've already scheduled this semester's lessons. I'm sorry. Hagrid looked deflated, but stubbornly opened the box wider. Look how lively they are. A spark shot from one Scroot's tail and set Hagrid's beard alight with a little flare. Vincent stepped back automatically. Enthusiastic little beasts, Hagrid muttered, patting embers from his whiskers. Want me to leave a few at your place, Professor? No, thank you, Vincent said firmly, just as footsteps signaled the student's approach. What a pity, Hagrid grumbled as he shut the crate and shuffled off. I'll show 'em to someone else. Harry, mixed in with the arriving students, sighed. They'd just endured a grim herbology class. Professor Sprout had them squeeze boobatuber pustules to collect the yellowish-green pus. Ron's robe still smelled strongly of it. At least Harry thought Care of Magical Creatures wouldn't involve anything that disgusting. Malfoy sidled up to Ron, pinching his nose theatrically. Merlin, he drawled. What's that smell? I thought a skunk had broken into Hogwarts. Shut up, Malfoy, Ron snapped, his face flushing. You'll all get to enjoy it soon, Harry said coldly, glancing at Malfoy. Unless you don't go to Professor Sprout's class. But I won't be as clumsy as you two, Malfoy sneered, laughing. Goyle barked a crude laugh beside him. Harry noticed Crabbe didn't join in. The big Slytherin stood pale and jittery, his eyes flicking around as if something had him on edge. Instead of mocking us, why don't you worry about your little man? Harry said, turning on Malfoy. He doesn't look well. Malfoy had seen Crabbe's condition earlier too. Annoyance flitted across his face. What's wrong with you? You've looked deathly since term started. Crabbe trembled. His lips moved, but no sound came. He avoided everyone's eyes. Then Harry said, blunt and cold, Give my regards to your father, Crabbe. The words landed like a hammer. Crabbe's head sank lower. His voice when he forced it out was a thin whisper. Draco, let's go. For the first time that morning, Malfoy's expression changed from disdain to alarm. He glared at Harry and ushered his two followers back into the Slytherin crowd. Harry felt a small rush of satisfaction at the effect his words had had, but a complicated knot of feeling tightened in his chest as well. Perhaps he shouldn't have said that. Chapter 290. The Puffskein Bird for Care of Magical Creatures. That day, Professor Vincent had brought in a cage of puffskein birds he'd purchased from Ms. Roskin's shop in Diagon Alley. His correspondence with the shopkeeper had become more frequent lately. Ms. Roskin wasn't only knowledgeable about magical beasts, she was full of initiative. Puffskein birds weren't easy to catch, for example. They were plump, fluffy, and flightless, but that didn't make them easy prey. When threatened, they would suddenly vanish and reappear somewhere else, almost like apparition. Muggles called them dodos and assumed they were extinct. In truth, their numbers had dwindled, but a few still survived in the magical world. After a quick introduction to the basics, Vincent lifted the cloth over the cage and revealed a dozen round, gray birds. "Take a look at these fascinating creatures," he said. The moment the cage opened, the puffskein birds rushed out and scampered between the student's legs. One of them ran straight toward Harry, stopped in front of him, and stared with bright, intelligent eyes. "They look like feathered potatoes," Ron muttered under his breath, lips pursed. "They're definitely the ugliest birds I've ever seen." Words, it turned out, were dangerous. The specially trained puffskeins looked dopey, but they were not stupid. They could understand human speech. The bird that had been watching Harry cocked its head and fixed its gaze on Ron. Ron swallowed and asked, awkwardly, "Apart from teleporting, do they have any other tricks?" "Pop!" With a soft sound, the bird vanished from the floor, and a second later, Ron felt a heavy weight settle on his head. The plump creature had perched itself on his mop of red hair. "Hey, get off!" Ron frantically tried to brush the bird away, but each time his fingers neared its feathers, it would disappear and reappear somewhere else, always out of reach. Eventually, he gave up and stood there with a puffskein on his head, silently hoping it didn't mistake him for a litter box. "That's my warning to you," Vincent said, chuckling. "Don't anger them, and don't harbor any ill will." Vincent let the students handle and feed the birds. Draco Malfoy tried several times to catch one, but each attempt was foiled as the bird popped out of sight and reappeared behind him, sticking out its tongue. "Crabbe Goyle," he snapped. "Block that fat one." "Yes, sir," the two boys answered in unison, though Crabbe looked listless. "What's wrong with you?" Draco demanded, frowning. He grabbed Crabbe's sleeve. "Tell me." Goyle scratched his head. "He's been like this for 2 days, Draco. Even barely eats dinner." "It's my business," Crabbe muttered. Draco released his grip with a sigh. He couldn't force the boy to talk. Vincent noticed the exchange and remembered Harry's earlier comment. Perhaps the scar-headed boy knew something. The puffskein they'd been chasing popped down onto Crabbe's head and tilted its beak toward Draco in a mocking appraisal. "Stupid bird," Draco muttered, drawing his wand in irritation. Before he could cast anything, the creature vanished again. "Draco, no wand," Vincent warned. "They're timid. A wand will frighten them." "Sorry, Professor," Draco replied with a polite nod that barely masked his annoyance. The class ended quickly. Once the students had gone, Vincent counted the puffskeins and came up one short. He suspected the bird had bolted when Draco pulled his wand. Puffskeins were skittish. At the hint of danger, they fled. How to retrieve a vanished puffskein? Ms. Roskin had anticipated such mishaps. Vincent took a folded letter from his robe pocket, the note that had come with the birds, and opened it. In the bottom corner, in neat italics, was a recall spell. Vincent tapped his wand to the parchment and began to chant the instructions. "Miss Roskin's wisdom is unmatched. Let's see where that foolish bird is hiding." The spell had a touch of the shopkeeper's personality. The ink gathered and rearranged itself until a small black arrow formed, fixed and unwavering like a compass needle. The arrow pointed in a single direction. Beneath it, fine script read, "Follow me. Don't get distracted, especially don't think about me." Clearing his throat, Vincent set off in the arrow's direction. It led him straight into the forbidden forest. If there was anywhere on Hogwarts grounds a lost puffskein might go, it would be there. Fresh air, quiet, and a host of odd things to keep a mischievous bird entertained. Vincent felt oddly at home as he pushed through the trees. He hadn't expected to find the bird so quickly. Perched on a branch, tilting its head, was the missing puffskein, with a bright red mushroom clamped in its beak. The bird blinked at him. In an instant, it was on Vincent's shoulder, and with a surprisingly deft little motion, it shoved the mushroom into his pocket, as if to say, "Thanks, I don't eat this." Vincent fished the mushroom out and, thinking quickly, popped it into the puffskyne's beak. The bird hesitated for a moment, then swallowed. 10 seconds later, it lay on the ground, foaming at the mouth. Vincent crouched beside the collapsed creature and frowned. Antidotes. Did the puffskyne prefer strawberry-flavored or blueberry? Chapter 291, Malnourished Bart. Just as Professor Vincent finished pouring the antidote into the Quidditch bird's beak and was about to leave with it, a mournful voice sounded at his ear. "Master, did you not notice Bart?" Startled, Vincent turned. To his left, on the trunk of a beech tree, Bart's familiar face had appeared. But where Bart had once been tall and imposing, he was now only a little larger than Hagrid. The tree's branches were sparse. A few yellowing leaves drooped listlessly. "Bart?" Vincent stepped forward, reaching out to stroke the rough bark. "What happened to you?" The single question seemed to upset Bart. "Master hasn't come to see Bart in a long time," he complained in a petulant voice. Bart counted the days every day. Finally, Bart couldn't wait any longer, so Bart came out himself. Vincent felt guilty. He'd completely forgotten about Bart over the summer. "My mistake," he said sincerely, placing his palm on the trunk and feeling the faint, weakened pulse of Bart's magic. "How did you end up like this? You used to be so much larger." "The original body couldn't walk this far," Bart pouted, the expression crudely rendered in the bark, so Bart had to shrink his size and come all the way here. Vincent activated the Tree of Wisdom scan to check Bart's condition. Name, Bart, species beech tree level 3, trait, great leader, status growing, percent malnourished, severe. Seeing the malnourished tag, Vincent's concern deepened. How had this poor fellow let himself get so starved? If Bart had been left to wither, it would have been terrible. Vincent hurried to the greenhouses and borrowed, rather swiped, a large supply of special fertilizer from Professor Sprout. Bart's roots plunged greedily into the pile. The whole tree trembled as he fed. The fertilizer visibly vanished, reduced to a grayish-white residue almost at once. Burp. A satisfied burp rumbled through the trunk, and 2 patches of color appeared on the bark as if he had blushed. Vincent checked Bart again. The malnourished status had vanished. Bart's size, however, remained only slightly larger than Hagrid's. The main change was that his leaves were greener and healthier. "Strange," Vincent mused. "Can you get back to your former height?" "Oh, this is good," Bart declared cheerfully. "This way Bart can move around more easily." With that, Bart pulled himself up out of the ground. Roots twisted into leg-like forms, the main trunk reconfigured, upper branches split into arm-like limbs, and sharper facial features emerged in the bark. In moments, a 3-meter-tall Trent stood before Vincent, much smaller than his old stature, but startlingly animated. As Bart had promised, he could move with surprising agility. He rushed forward and gave Vincent a crushing hug. The professor felt the pressure of 2 moving oak timbers. The rough bark scraped his cheeks until they ached. "Thank you, but you can let go now," Vincent managed. Bart released him, and to Vincent's astonishment, performed a backflip. Vincent had never seen a tree do a backflip before. Curious, Vincent ran tests on Bart's new Trent form. The results were remarkable. Despite his reduced size, his physical defenses and resistance to magic had increased several-fold. An unamplified exploding charm left only a small mark on him. Fire, however, remained a weakness. When Vincent sent a jet of flame from his wand, Bart leapt 30 feet away without hesitation. Even so, Bart's combat capability had become significant. When Vincent invited Bart to visit Hogwarts, Bart hesitated. "No, Master, Bart cannot leave the Forbidden Forest," he said sadly. "If Bart leaves, he becomes an ordinary tree and all his magic disappears." Vincent considered this. The Forbidden Forest must be the source of Bart's power. His great leader trait seemed to function only within the forest, affecting the plants there. Vincent recalled bringing a pot of flowers from Sprout's greenhouse to test. Bart's metamorphosis potion hadn't affected them at all. "All right," Vincent said comfortingly. "I'll come visit you often." Bart nodded vigorously. The leaves atop his crown shivered happily. Then his figure melted back into the depths of the Forbidden Forest. Vincent watched him go, a little moved. Perhaps Bart would reveal more surprises in time. September 5th. 4 days into the school year, students had settled into routines. First years were still getting lost in the castle as usual. That evening, Vincent went to the Great Hall for dinner, but when he pushed open the doors, a strange hush greeted him. The usual clamor had fallen away. Conversation was subdued, and the Slytherin table wore a particularly gloomy look, as if some fresh irritation had ruffled them. Professor McGonagall stood near the entrance, looking displeased. "What happened?" Vincent asked quietly as he approached. She heaved a sigh. "Professor Moody and Professor Snape had a fierce argument just now, almost came to blows, right here in the hall." Vincent nodded. The outburst was abrupt, but given Snape's past as a Death Eater, Moody's temper wasn't surprising. "It's outrageous," McGonagall went on, frowning. "They are two adults. Fighting in front of the students is unacceptable." "Yes," Vincent agreed. "It shouldn't have come to that." McGonagall brightened suddenly. "Professor Vincent, you seem to have a good relationship with Moody. Could you speak with him? At least try to keep them from fighting in the school." "Me?" Vincent blinked, instinctively pointing to himself. This felt like a matter for the headmaster, or deputy headmistress. McGonagall only smiled and nodded. Chapter 292, A Talk with Moody. Knock, knock. "Come in." Moody's low, hoarse voice came from behind the door. Vincent pushed it open and stopped short. The office was disconcertingly bare, blank walls and bare floor, a small wooden chest, a couple of chairs, and a wooden table with a single lonely sneakoscope sitting on it. Apart from that, there was nothing. "Where are your things?" Vincent asked. "They're all in the chest." Moody rose from his chair and walked over. "I don't like leaving my belongings lying around in strange places. Ah, speaking of which, Professor Vincent, what brings you here?" "Just dropping by," Vincent replied shortly. "That's good. I welcome it." Moody's voice had an almost pleased quality that surprised Vincent. He had expected the man he'd heard about, paranoid, twitchy, but the Moody in front of him, though sharp-eyed, spoke calmly and with an unexpected hint of warmth. Moody gestured to a wooden chair. It was hard, but a chair nonetheless. Vincent settled and was about to speak when Moody cut straight to the point. "I heard you killed a Death Eater at the Quidditch World Cup." "Death Eater?" Vincent shook his head. "I don't know who told you that. I didn't do it. A Death Eater did die, but it wasn't my doing. Other Death Eaters did it." "Crab." Moody narrowed his one normal eye. "Ah, that explains it. Someone cursed him and he exploded in front of me, like fireworks. Poor fellow," Vincent said, remembering the nauseating scene. "Poor?" Moody sneered. "I wouldn't be so sentimental. When you know who was active, Crabbe personally tortured several Muggleborns to death. A man like him belongs in Azkaban." "Fair enough." Vincent didn't press it. He still felt faint at the memory of Crabbe's death, especially right after lunch. He switched topics. "Professor McGonagall told me you and Snape had an unpleasant exchange in the Great Hall this morning." Moody paused, then said flatly, "You should know, Snape's a Death Eater, no different from Crabbe. If it weren't for Dumbledore vouching for him, he'd be in Azkaban with the rest of them." "What's ironic about that?" Vincent prompted. "He tortured people with cruel potions, and now he's standing in front of children, teaching them the very subject he used to use to hurt them." Moody's expression was unreadable. "He should not be in a position of authority." Vincent inclined his head. "Professor McGonagall asked me to tell you to avoid any confrontations inside the castle." Moody's magical eye spun briefly, then fixed on Vincent. "Are you blaming me?" "No, of course not." Vincent smiled faintly. "I only meant there are ways to handle it. Snape goes into Diagon Alley, or Nocturne Alley, at a predictable time each month to buy things. You could draw him out of the school." Moody was silent for a moment, then said slowly, "Good idea." Vincent allowed himself a brief, private moment of sympathy for Snape. Being targeted by an old auror like Moody would be unpleasant, even for Snape. Still, if McGonagall only wanted to keep their quarrels out of the castle, luring him outside was a simple enough solution. The conversation shifted away from Crabbe and Snape, and the mood lightened. Moody rummaged in his chest, produced 2 cups, and poured Vincent a cup of tea. Tea leaves he'd borrowed from the auror's office, Vincent suspected. They spoke about defense against the dark arts. "Students need more training," Moody said, considering. "I trained new aurors for years. The problem is the same, too lax, too naive. If you know who comes back, most of them won't know how to defend themselves. His magical eye swung toward the door, then back to Vincent. Most of them can't even do basic defensive spells. They need a sense of danger. How about showing them the unforgivable curses? Let them see what's real. Vincent offered. Moody's eyes stopped rotating. He shook his head hard. I don't think so. I'm here to teach, not to terrorize. Right. Thoughtless suggestion, Vincent said, and felt a newfound respect for Moody's restraint. Eccentric as he could be, Moody was more principled than Vincent had assumed. Do you teach a portion of defense every year? Vincent asked. I do on occasion, Moody said, taking a long drink from his hip flask. I hear the students talk. Vincent laughed. It is a cursed post every year. The defense professor always has trouble. You teach well enough, Moody ignored the superstition. What about Cedric Diggory? Do you remember him? He's got promise. Every professor appreciates good students, Vincent said. He hadn't expected Moody to praise one spontaneously, but it showed the man took teaching seriously. Moody's voice rose. Even promising students need more. Intensive, appropriate training. What are you planning? Vincent asked. More classes. Moody's words came out breathless. I'm going to push Dumbledore. Students must learn to protect themselves. The Death Eaters are already moving. There's not much time before you-know-who returns. A gust of wind rattled the window. Moody's hand went to his wand, fingers closing on it for a heartbeat before he relaxed and slid it back onto his belt. That's a good idea, Vincent said again, thinking of how to frame it for the staff. But I don't know if Dumbledore will agree. The students are already overburdened. It's necessary, Moody insisted, his wooden leg thumping on the floor. His hoarse voice held no doubt. Necessary. As Vincent left the office, he had a clearer picture of the man, volatile at times but a devoted and capable teacher. Moody cared less about comfort and more about preparing students for the real dangers out there. Before he left, Moody mentioned Harry Potter. Harry's already a fighter, Moody said, with a rare softness, but he's not quite ready yet. Chapter 293, Arrival of School Representatives. Days passed. As Professor Vincent had predicted, Dumbledore refused Moody's request to increase the number of Defense Against the Dark Arts classes. He did allow Moody to run his own club, however. Moody accepted gladly, but participation was sparse, and no Slytherins joined. Within a few days, the handful of students who had tried it dropped out. Moody's training, people said, was far too strict, and the club was quickly suspended. Mid-October arrived. That day, an exciting notice appeared on the Hogwarts bulletin board. Representatives from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang would arrive on October 30th. The castle seemed to change subtly. A delicate excitement hummed through the corridors. Even the professors felt it. At lunch, Professor Vincent sat with Flitwick and Sprout. Pomona, which bow should I wear? Flitwick asked, perched on his chair with two cushions, holding up a bright blue bow and a red one with an anxious expression. The left one, my dear, Sprout said, but don't forget, it's still early for the tournament. Oh, it's coming, Flitwick said, settling the blue bow on his lap. I'm preparing for the Christmas ball. Tradition. Christmas is further off, Sprout replied, then turned to Vincent. What do you think, Professor Vincent? Ah, yes, Vincent answered distractedly, but in good spirits. It was a day worth celebrating for him, though not because of the tournament. That morning, the Tree of Wisdom had finally purified the soul fragment attached to the Slytherin locket, and he had rushed to the United States. After absorbing that soul energy, his sister's soul had been almost completely restored. He only needed to recover one more Horcrux from Lord Voldemort. He hoped there would be no more surprises. After classes that afternoon, the Weasley twins knocked at his door. You want the recipe for an aging potion? Vincent asked, surprised to hear their request. Don't think I don't know why. You want to sign up for the Triwizard Tournament, don't you? Please, Professor, they said in unison. Do you even know how Hogwarts chooses its champions? Vincent asked with interest. The twins exchanged looks. We looked up past tournaments, Fred said honestly. The selection is done by a magical object, the Goblet of Fire. That's the tradition, George added. We expect it'll be the same this time. You did your homework, Vincent said, a little surprised. I can give you the aging potion recipe and some ingredients, but on one condition. What condition? Fred asked quickly. Vincent smiled. Give me a copy of every prank item you've made. Deal, they cried. Vincent received a grateful basket of miscellaneous devices and in exchange handed over the recipe and a large bag of materials. He remained skeptical the twins could brew the potion successfully. The aging potion is difficult. Even students who pass their NEWT potions exam might struggle to make it. At last, October 30th arrived. In the early evening, all the students and professors gathered on the lawn in front of the castle. A cool October breeze chased leaves across the grounds, but excitement kept faces warm. The staff stood together, newly robed, Vincent included. Even Snape had apparently washed and styled his hair. "How's my bow? Straight?" Flitwick asked Vincent nervously. "Perfect, Professor," Vincent replied. A collective gasp cut through the air. "Look at the sky!" A speck of light hung over the grounds, growing rapidly. 12 silver-maned winged horses pulled a huge pale blue carriage down from the heavens. Their hooves skimmed the surface of the black lake, sending up sprays of sparkling water. Vincent recognized the breed immediately. Abraxans, enormous winged horses he'd introduced in class, the only kind large enough to draw a carriage 5 or 6 stories tall. The carriage landed gracefully on the open ground, demanding every eye. "They certainly make a grand entrance," Flitwick murmured, awed. Madame Maxime stepped slowly down from the carriage. Taller than Hagrid, she moved with aristocratic grace, every gesture composed, almost the opposite of Hagrid's rough warmth. Behind her, a cluster of Beauxbaton students in light blue silk uniforms spilled from the carriage, nervous and curious in equal measure. "Welcome, Madame Maxime." Dumbledore greeted her with a smile and a hand extended. Although Dumbledore was tall, Maxime still had to dip slightly to take his hand. Vincent's eyes, however, were not on Maxime or her students. He spotted Roskin, the owner of the Diagon Alley Magical Creatures shop, among the Beauxbaton's contingent. Beside her was an astonishingly beautiful little girl, barely 10, laughing and chatting as if she belonged. Roskin drifted to the side with Maxime, and when their gazes met, she gave Vincent a mysterious smile before turning away. A sudden commotion rose from the center of the Black Lake. Water churned into a vast whirlpool, and, from its heart, a dark ship climbed up, slick and gleaming with a cold, unsettling luster. The Durmstrang students disembarked in formation, cloaked in heavy furs and wearing stern expressions, completely unlike the Beauxbatons group. Leading them was Igor Karkaroff, his gaze sharp as he swept the crowd, only relaxing into a warm smile when he saw Dumbledore. If Beauxbatons was best known for its Abraxan horses, Durmstrang's most notable export was without doubt Victor Krum, the seeker for the Bulgarian national team and the hottest Quidditch star in Europe. What Vincent cared about, though, was Roskin. He remembered, vaguely amused, that the clerk from his magical creatures shop had once told him their boss was traveling in Beauxbatons. At the time, he'd assumed it was a joke. Leaving a clerk unattended for months, however, was not the mark of a responsible employer. The last time he'd been to the shop, the clerk's resentment had been nearly tangible. When everyone had arrived, Dumbledore cheerfully told them to go to the Great Hall. Hogwarts had few seating rules. Visiting students from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang were free to sit where they pleased. Krum, to everyone's surprise, took a place at the Slytherin table, while the Beauxbaton students drifted among Ravenclaw. The 2 visiting headmistresses sat on either side of Dumbledore, and Roskin naturally took the seat beside Vincent. 2 chairs at the staff table remained empty. Vincent assumed they were being saved for Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch, the organizers of the Triwizard Tournament. "You look surprised I came," Roskin said in a bright mood. "A little," Vincent replied with a shrug. "I heard your clerk say you were traveling in Beauxbatons. You haven't been running the shop for months, aside from the occasional reply. I'd smooth things over with her. She sounded pretty angry." Roskin waved it off. "I gave her a raise." Money solved a lot of things, Vincent thought, but Roskin's casual tone suggested she didn't worry much about staff feelings. Madame Maxime, sitting nearby, had noticed the exchange. "You know each other?" she asked in heavily accented English. "Old friends," Roskin answered with a bright smile. Dumbledore peered over his glasses. "And this is?" Madame Maxime set her goblet down with a small, graceful movement. "A magizoology expert from Beauxbatons. The Abraxans are in season and need special care. Professor Roskin has extraordinary expertise in breeding magical creatures," She's the only one I would trust with them. Roskin received the praise with a small, proud nod. She must be a fine young person, Dumbledore said with a smile. Vincent looked Roskin over. She wore the pale blue Beauxbatons uniform. Her black hair fell casually around her shoulders, her face smooth and unlined. She certainly fit Dumbledore's idea of young. Vincent, however, knew you couldn't judge a witch's age by appearances. "Forgive my impertinence," he murmured, lowering his voice. "How old are you?" "If you find it impertinent, then don't ask," Roskin replied stiffly. "Oh, right." Vincent dropped it. Though they had known each other a long time, that question had crossed into private territory. Roskin's sensitivity made him wonder whether she might be much older than she looked. By then, Bagman and Crouch had arrived and taken their seats. The feast the house elves had prepared was lavish. Vincent stared at the sardine pie before him, fish heads poking out in all directions, empty-eyed and staring at the ceiling. He nudged it toward Roskin. She nudged it back. "I don't like this," she said with an amused smile. "All right," Vincent sighed and pushed the pie away from the table. "I'll deal with it." A Beauxbatons student hurried up then, bundled in a heavy cloak despite the warmth of the hall. Only a pair of shimmering silver eyes showed through a black veil. "Professor," she said to Roskin, "it's time to feed the Abraxans. I'm afraid Hagrid won't be able to manage alone." "Don't worry," Vincent cut in. "Hagrid will take care of it." "But," the girl began to protest, but Roskin interrupted lightly. "It's fine," she said. "Feeding the Abraxans isn't difficult. Fleur, how long are you going to keep that veil on? Do take it off. It's rather rude to keep it on indoors." The veiled girl hesitated, then removed it. Silver hair fell like a waterfall down her back. Her face was delicate and exquisitely beautiful. Vincent immediately understood why she'd hidden herself. She was a Vila, or at least partly so. Fleur bowed with the graceful courtesy of Beauxbatons. "Hello, Professor Vincent," she said softly. "Professor Roskin and I spoke of you." "This is Fleur Delacour," Roskin added, a small, almost mischievous gleam in her eye. "One of Bobon's most promising students." "Hello," Vincent said. After Fleur had gone, Vincent asked Roskin in a low voice, "She's part Vila, isn't she?" Fleur had already answered before Roskin could. "Yes, Professor. I'm 1/4 Vila." "No wonder I felt a particular attraction," Vincent said sincerely, then quickly added, "Of course, even discounting her Vila blood, she's very beautiful, Miss Delacour." "Thank you," Fleur replied, surprised for a moment, then smiling. Compliments were compliments, whatever their source. Chapter 295, Can You Throw Fireballs? When Roskin noticed Vincent unmoved by Fleur's charm, she couldn't help a small twinge of boredom. Still, she told herself it made sense. Vincent was not a hot-headed young wizard. He was experienced, measured. It was his first time meeting a witch with Vila blood, and he watched Fleur with obvious curiosity. "So, Miss Delacour," Vincent leaned forward, interest plain in his voice, "may I ask which abilities you inherited from the Vila? You don't have to answer if you'd rather not. Privacy is important, but I'm curious." A flicker of caution passed across Fleur's face, then she relaxed. "Only a part of it. I think you felt it, Professor, just now." "Oh no, I meant something else." Vincent shook his head and leaned in a little closer, a trace of excitement in his expression. "Can you throw fireballs?" "Fireballs?" Fleur blinked, taken aback. "Oh, throw fireballs," Vincent repeated. "I once encountered a true Vila. When I angered her, she took on a bird-like head and hurled fireballs at me." "I can't do that." Fleur's face turned slightly puzzled. It was the first time anyone had asked her that. "What a pity." Vincent sounded disappointed. The destructive power of those fireballs interested him. It was worth studying. By the time the feast wound down, Dumbledore rose and instantly drew every eye in the Great Hall to him. "I think you all know what I'm going to say," he smiled. "But first, allow me to introduce two guests. Mr. Barty Crouch, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and Mr. Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports." Polite applause filled the hall. Bagman, all grin, waved enthusiastically. Crouch merely nodded, his gray hair and robes neat enough to belong to a banker. From their table, the Weasley twins glared at Bagman through clenched teeth. He still owed them gambling winnings and had no intention of paying. They only tolerated his presence because goblins couldn't enter Hogwarts to collect their debt. Over the past few months, Mr. Bagman and Mr. Crouch have been working to ensure the smooth running of the Triwizard Tournament, said Dumbledore, and we should thank them for their efforts. They, along with myself, Principal Karkaroff, and Madame Maxime, will form the panel of judges who evaluate the champions' performances. Whispers ran through the students. Now, bring it up, Mr. Filch. Argus Filch, who hadn't been seen for a while, stepped out of a shadowed corner, Madame Norris at his heels. No one cared about the cat, all eyes fixed on the large, jewel-encrusted wooden box he carried. Vincent knew what it held. Professor McGonagall had said she and Dumbledore had searched long and hard to recover it. Since the last Triwizard Tournament in 1792, the Goblet of Fire had been locked away in a Hogwarts storeroom. For centuries, Dumbledore's voice took on its usual quiet authority as he tapped the box with his wand. The Goblet of Fire has been the most impartial judge of the Triwizard Tournament. It can not only recognize names, but peer into hearts and determine who truly has the qualifications of a champion. The lid sprang open. A plain wooden goblet floated out and set itself on the box's lid, and a blue-white flame shot up from within the cup, settling into a complex, contained fire that danced and braided itself in ways that read like a language to those who knew. The hall fell so silent you could hear breathing. Students who wished to enter should write their name and school on a piece of parchment and place it into the Goblet of Fire before the Halloween feast tomorrow evening, Dumbledore continued. I must emphasize, this is a binding magical contract. If the goblet chooses you, you are obliged to compete. Consider carefully. Tomorrow night, the Goblet of Fire will select the 3 most suitable individuals. At that, Fleur straightened with an air of confidence. The Beauxbatons students exchanged excited looks. Crumb remained composed and unreadable. Even Harry looked thoughtful. Becoming a champion was an alluring prospect for any young witch or wizard. One last point, Dumbledore added. For safety reasons, only students who are 17 years of age or older may enter. I will draw an age line around the Goblet of Fire. An age line, Fred Weasley exclaimed. So some of us don't even get a chance? You understand correctly, gentlemen, Dumbledore replied without indulgence. The restriction was no real surprise. Professor Flitwick had included it in the handouts earlier, but many younger students had been hoping for a loophole and had prepared countermeasures. The twins were no exception. They had finally finished brewing an aging potion the previous day, though they weren't entirely sure how well it would work. With a few more brief remarks, safety instructions, schedules, and a reminder that the judge's decision was final, Dumbledore dismissed the assembly. The rest of the day passed without incident. Chapter 296, The Attempt on the Flame Cup. The next day. Although it was Saturday, the students woke earlier than on most school days, undoubtedly because of the Flame Cup. The cup sat on the stool normally reserved for the sorting hat, right in the center of the entrance hall. 4 thin bands of gold circled it. Those were the wards Dumbledore had placed to keep anyone under 17 away. When Professor Vincent came into the Great Hall for breakfast, the entrance hall was already packed with onlookers. Everyone wanted to see who would drop a slip of paper with their name into the flame cup. But Vincent's gaze was fixed on the 4 golden bands. Where the students saw only lines, he could see the complex weave of magic inside them. As I thought, he murmured with a touch of admiration. Ordinary charms couldn't breach that barrier. It could be forced open by a powerful counterspell, finite incantatum, for example, but that wasn't something ordinary students could do. A stir rose behind him. The crowd parted as a line of Durmstrang students, wrapped in heavy fur cloaks, moved forward. At their head was Igor Karkaroff, silver-gray fur on his shoulders, beard and hair neatly trimmed, small, sharp eyes sweeping the hall with barely concealed disdain. Vincent felt those eyes linger on him for a moment, as if sizing him up. The attention made him frown. Karkaroff gave Vincent a polite, thin smile, then led his students straight to the flame cup and stopped. He walked around it twice, then turned to his school and said flatly, "Go on, sign up." Durmstrang students instantly formed a line. One by one, they stepped up and dropped their prepared slips into the blue fire. Each time a paper was swallowed, the flames leapt higher and spat a few dazzling sparks, drawing gasps from the crowd. Victor Crumb went last. Every movement precise, economical, like a Quidditch maneuver. When the Durmstrang group had finished, Karkaroff swept his students into the Great Hall with efficient pride. The whole process had been swift, decisive, and a little intimidating. Durmstrang's champion has to be Crumb, Ron said in a voice of admiration from beside Vincent. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had somehow worked their way into the crowd. They'd been watching with wide eyes like everyone else. Vincent glanced at them. "Are you here to sign up?" he asked. "We're not old enough," Harry replied, shaking his head. Ron started counting on his fingers. "I'm still 2 years and 4 months away," he complained, pouting. "Don't fret about the age restriction," Vincent said with a small chuckle. "It's not an absolute barrier. If you ask me, Dumbledore put those wards there partly to make you try to get past them. Otherwise, he could have used something far less subtle." "Really?" Hermione looked surprised. Vincent hadn't lowered his voice. Everyone nearby could hear him. Conversation flared up among the students. "I never said that, Professor Vincent," Dumbledore's calm voice cut in from the side. The hall quieted at once. He was coming out of the Great Hall in a purple-patterned robe today. Vincent's expression barely changed. "There's no harm in trying, is there?" he said lightly. "Of course not." Dumbledore smiled, then winked at the students. "Be bold and try, children. But I should warn you, Miss Fawcett of Ravenclaw and Mr. Summers of Hufflepuff are at Madame Pomfrey's at the moment. They apparently tried to make themselves older and failed." The remark sent a ripple of snickers through the crowd. A few students exchanged knowing glances. Vincent noticed Fred and George Weasley peering around a pillar, eyes bright and conspiratorial. Clearly they had heard Dumbledore's aside. "Do you think Fawcett and Summers used an aging potion?" Fred asked his brother, sounding a little worried. "No idea," George answered, swallowing. "But we've already taken something. We're not quitting now." "Let's go," Fred said, resignation and excitement in his voice. They stepped out from behind the pillar together. Make way," they called as they approached the golden bands. The hall fell silent. "Isn't their birthday in April? They should still be a few months off," Ron muttered. Fred counted down under his breath. 3, 2, 1. The twins stepped across the lines together. There was a blinding flash of golden light and a sharp snap, like a whip cracking. An invisible force threw them backward. They flew through the air. Dumbledore raised a hand, and a soft glow caught them, easing their fall so they landed without hurting themselves. But when they touched down, they looked completely different. Beards of thick white hair hung down to their chests, and their hair had gone snow-white. Laughter burst out around the hall. Fred and George stared at each other in the shock of sudden age. "Oh," George touched his long beard. "I didn't expect this." "Hey, anyone got a mirror? I want to see what I look like," Fred shouted. "You two are identical," someone called back. Dumbledore's eyes were twinkling. "I did warn you, gentlemen," he said. "Go to Madame Pomfrey. She'll have a remedy. We suspected this might happen." Pushing and shoving, grumbling and laughing, the twins set off for the infirmary. Dumbledore looked out over the assembled students. "Anyone else want to try?" he asked. Silence answered him. Everyone instinctively shrank back from the wards. Dumbledore smiled and gave another gentle wink. "Caution is a good thing," he said. "You still have plenty of time to try." Chapter 297, Karkaroff and Moody. Today, the Hogwarts entrance hall was busier than Vincent had ever seen it. The hospital wing, too, was paying the price. Despite the Weasley twins' earlier lesson, people kept trying to cross the age line, and the ward's patient load spiked. Harry had made several attempts himself, using finite incantatum and other counterspells, but nothing affected the barrier. At noon, he even slipped into the empty hall to test being an animagus, only to be shoved back by an invisible force the moment he touched the line. Not even an animagus could fool Dumbledore's magic. Around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, a light drizzle started. Vincent was walking along the courtyard corridor, thinking over an experiment he'd just tried. He'd thrown a slip of paper with his name into the goblet of fire. The goblet spat the paper back immediately. It refused to acknowledge someone who was nearly 30. When he tossed the paper in, a status effect had appeared on him, contract Goblet of Fire, and it vanished the instant the paper was ejected. That was clearly a magical trait of the goblet, but its selection criteria, age, magic, reputation, something else, remained a mystery. A noisy commotion down a nearby corridor pulled him out of his thoughts. He pushed through and found a small crowd huddled around, whispering and craning their necks. "What's going on?" He asked the nearest student, Cedric, who had just come from the entrance hall and still looked worried. "Principal Karkaroff was in a row with Professor Moody," Cedric said. Vincent asked. Cedric shook his head. No one seemed to know. Vincent slipped forward until he could see for himself. Karkaroff and Moody faced each other, about to come to blows. No wands had been drawn, but the air was terse. Karkaroff looked pale, while Moody's magical eye rotated, taking everything in. Vincent clapped his hands and addressed the gathered students as one of the older teachers might. "All right, everyone, back to your common rooms. The Halloween feast isn't far off. You should get ready." His tone worked. The students reluctantly dispersed. A few older ones lingered to catch one last glimpse, but a single glare from Vincent sent them off as well. For a moment, he felt oddly like Professor McGonagall. When the corridor was clear, Vincent hung back to watch. Karkaroff straightened his collar and tried to look composed. "I'm leaving, Moody," he said stiffly. "Now's not the time for old stories. I have important things to attend to." Moody's eye kept turning. His voice was a dry rasp. "Of course," he said. "If I have time, I'll find you again, old friend. We can have a civil chat then, maybe a cup of tea." Without another word, Karkaroff hurried off, stumbling slightly as if he might fall. Fortunately, none of the students had seen him so disheveled. Durmstrang's dignity was preserved. Moody watched him go and let out a contemptuous snort. Once Karkaroff had vanished around the corner, Vincent stepped forward. "What happened, Professor Moody?" Moody snorted. "Didn't you see? That coward got the fright of his life when he saw me." He spat the words out. "A man who can't even stand his ground." "You mean Karkaroff?" Vincent asked. "Isn't he the head of Durmstrang? Do you two know each other?" Moody's expression hardened. "More than that. Don't ask me what's been going on recently, but Death Eaters have been cropping up again and again. Karkaroff used to be a Death Eater. I put him in Azkaban myself." Vincent was taken aback. He hadn't known. A former Azkaban prisoner now heading Durmstrang, no small thing. He wondered how Karkaroff had ever been freed. Most Azkaban inmates never got out. "You don't know?" Moody frowned. "That's worrying. It wasn't that long ago. In court, Karkaroff gave a list, names and information on other Death Eaters. He turned informant and got a reduced sentence and release." Vincent nodded. He had been traveling the world at the time. It made sense he'd missed the story. Karkaroff, then, had been a traitor to his own faction. Traitors were always despised. "Durmstrang openly teaches the dark arts," Vincent said. "If the head is a former Death Eater, that's hardly surprising. But I don't think exposing children to the dark arts so early is wise. It warps them." "That's exactly the Death Eater way," Moody sneered. "To teach the dark arts so you can breed madmen in their master's image. The stench of dark magic sticks to Karkaroff. I don't think he can produce anything like a great student." Vincent shrugged and kept his own counsel. One of Moody's lines, though, intrigued him. "You can sense dark magic on Karkaroff?" he asked. "Of course," Moody replied with a hint of pride. "Don't underestimate an old man who's been catching dark wizards for decades. Even with one eye gone, my senses haven't given up on me." "That's truly impressive," Vincent said. As dusk fell, the Halloween feast began on schedule. The flame cup had been moved from the entrance hall back to the center of the great hall. The spread was as lavish as ever, roast turkeys sizzling in fat and pumpkin pies exhaling a warm, sugary scent. But everyone seemed preoccupied, eager to finish their plates as quickly as possible. Seated at the staff table, Vincent felt the tension in the room. Everyone was waiting for Dumbledore to announce the final list of champions. At last, no more food was served, and the clatter of cutlery that had ebbed and flowed across the hall gradually fell away to silence. Under every pair of eyes, Dumbledore rose slowly, raised his hands, and said, "It seems everyone is impatient. I imagine the Flame Cup is about to choose its champions." He pointed to a door behind the staff table. "Once the champions' names are called, I ask that they step forward a few paces and then enter that door. They will receive initial instructions there." Dumbledore had always been masterful at creating an atmosphere. He flicked his wand lightly, and most of the lights in the Great Hall went out, leaving only the faint glow of pumpkin lanterns on the long tables. Then, Unhurriedly, he walked to the flame cup. 1 minute left, he said. Everyone turned to the cup, silently counting down. Vincent used the tree of wisdom to scan the people present. As he expected, Fleur, Crumb, and Cedric all bore the contract flame cup marking. No surprise there. What troubled him was that Harry had the same contract status. Harry appearing as a potential champion meant the cup had selected him. In the original sequence of events, Harry had become the fourth champion through Barty Crouch Jr.'s manipulation. After so much time in contact, Vincent was now certain that Moody had not been replaced by Crouch. If Moody was still himself, then someone else had tampered with the cup. Vincent never believed Harry had signed up on his own. Before he could think further, the minute passed. The cup's flames shifted from blue to red as if stirred by an unseen force. The goblet shot up a brilliant column of fire and spat out a scorched slip of parchment that flew through the air. The Durmstrang champion. Dumbledore caught the strip and read in a booming voice, "Victor Krum!" Thunderous applause filled the hall. Krum rose, expressionless, and strode toward the staff table, disappearing behind the door. Nobody was surprised. He was the obvious choice among the Durmstrang students. The cup surged again and produced a second slip. The Beauxbatons champion. Dumbledore unfolded it and announced, "Fleur Delacour." The silver-haired girl stood with elegant poise, gave a slight nod, and followed Krum into the instruction room. "All as expected, isn't it?" Roskin whispered to Vincent, a touch of pride in her voice. "Indeed," Vincent replied, though he already knew what would come next. The Great Hall's tension rose. Everyone held their breath for the Hogwarts champion. The cup's flames contracted and then violently expanded. A third parchment was expelled. "The Hogwarts champion, Cedric Diggory," Dumbledore called. The Hufflepuff table erupted in deafening cheers. Cedric stood gracefully, smiled, and bowed to his tablemates. "Well done." Ernie clapped him on the shoulder. Vincent smiled and nodded. Cedric was a deserved choice. After Cedric entered the instruction room, the applause lingered and slowly died away. For a moment, the anxious atmosphere in the hall seemed to vanish. Dumbledore clapped his hands cheerfully. "Excellent. The 3 champions have been chosen. I hope they will make every effort to prepare for the tasks ahead. They will be extremely perilous. As for the rest of us, including our guests from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, we can play an important part in supporting and cheering on our champions." He had barely finished when the flame cup stirred once more. As before, the flames churned, and a fourth parchment was spat out, floating slowly down in front of Dumbledore as if guided by an invisible hand. Silence fell over the hall. Every face was fixed on the paper. Dumbledore seemed for a moment stunned, then reached for the slip and read in a voice that rolled like thunder, "Harry Potter." An uproar broke out across the hall. Vincent exhaled quietly. Who had done this? At the Gryffindor table, Harry looked around in confusion when he heard his name. "Wait," he called to those beside him. "Don't we already have a champion?" His housemates looked as bewildered as he felt. Before anyone could answer, Dumbledore spoke again. "Harry Potter," he said, "step forward and go to the instruction room." Harry stood up stiffly. He leaned toward Hermione and Ron and whispered, "I didn't sign up. I don't know what's going on." "Go," Hermione urged with a tight smile. "We can talk when you get back." Harry walked toward the door behind the staff table, his steps oddly light. He knew Hermione had misunderstood. She probably thought he had managed to bypass the age restriction somehow. But there was no time to explain. He felt the weight of the hall's stare. Shock, suspicion, envy, even anger. "Interesting," Roskin murmured. "Hogwarts has 2 champions? That doesn't seem fair." Vincent could only nod helplessly. Chapter 299, The Contract. Inside the instruction room, Harry stared at Fleur, Krum, and Cedric, feeling at a loss. He didn't know how the 3 of them would react when he told them he was also a champion. Before he could say anything, a sound came from behind. A crowd was squeezing in. Dumbledore, Barty Crouch, Ludo Bagman, Professor McGonagall, almost everyone involved with the Triwizard Tournament. Professor Vincent was among them. "All right, let me explain the situation," Ludo Bagman said, clearing his throat. He stepped forward, put a hand on Harry's shoulder, and smiled at the 3 confused champions. "Just now, something odd happened. The Goblet of Fire chose a 4th champion, Harry Potter, of Hogwarts." Fleur's eyes widened. Wait, she said, looking at Bagman. Are you saying Hogwarts has two champions? That's right, Bagman answered. Crumb and Cedric looked equally surprised. Madame Maxime immediately turned to Dumbledore. This isn't fair, she said. What does this mean, Dumbledore? You must explain. Ah, yes, Karkaroff sneered from the side. If Hogwarts has two champions, then perhaps we need more slots too. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he addressed Harry calmly. Harry, did you in any way put your name into the goblet? Harry shook his head eagerly. Professor, I tried a few times, but the age line stopped me. It wouldn't let me. Let us suppose that's true, Dumbledore said, then turned to the assembly. Everyone should know that the goblet could not choose four champions if it were functioning properly. The most likely explanation is that it has failed. The goblet hasn't been used for too long and has malfunctioned. Malfunction? Karkaroff hissed. What a convenient excuse, Dumbledore. I can withdraw, Harry said suddenly. My age doesn't meet the rules for this tournament. Since this was an accident, I can give up my participation. Everyone turned to him. Harry took a breath. It's an accident. I can step down. Now that's more like it, Karkaroff said, smiling. This is not permitted. Barty Crouch stepped forward, his tone leaving no room for argument. The tournament must follow its rules precisely. Anyone chosen must compete. Withdrawal once selected is not allowed. The room fell silent. Karkaroff's smile froze. Madame Maxime frowned. But this is our participant asking to withdraw, Karkaroff insisted. Withdrawal is not feasible, Professor Wisen said. The goblet's contract carries ancient magic. Any champion who is chosen and then actively gives up will suffer the contract's backlash. Backlash? Harry asked, startled. What does that mean? I don't know for certain, Wisen admitted. We'd have to ask the goblet's creator. But without doubt, if you actively forfeit, you will be punished. Perhaps the magic will consume you in the fire of the goblet. He shrugged. It was only a theory. The goblet had been unused for a long time, and records were scarce. Harry shivered. Crouch nodded once, expressionless. The tournament will proceed as planned. All four will participate. There is no question. Karkaroff scowled, but fell silent. After the discussion, Harry remained a champion of the Triwizard tournament, much to the displeasure of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. Crouch then gave the four champions the basic guidance. The first task would be on November 24th. It would test courage, and champions were not allowed to receive help from third parties during the competition. It was little more than a reminder. No specific details of the tasks were revealed. Professor Wisen noticed that Crouch looked unusually tired, the dark circles under his eyes showing he had not been sleeping well. Understandably so. The events at the Quidditch World Cup had been recent, and Crouch must be under a great deal of pressure. Soon Crouch finished and told Dumbledore, I must go, Albus. Of course, Dumbledore said, concerned. Aren't you staying at Hogwarts tonight, Barty? No, Crouch replied. The department is very busy. I've left young Weatherby in charge for now. He's very enthusiastic. A bit too enthusiastic, perhaps. I can't be away for long. I hope it goes well, Dumbledore said, offering the usual comforts. Do you want to use my fireplace in the office? Yes, thank you. Word that Harry had not been disqualified spread quickly through Hogwarts, and reactions were mixed. Hufflepuff was especially upset. Some students felt Harry had stolen the honor that rightfully belonged to Cedric Diggory. Gryffindor students were more supportive. Harry had strong academics, was excellent at Quidditch, and many thought that if he were 17, he might well become Hogwarts champion in any case. For a while, Harry was under a lot of pressure. His friends, Ron and Hermione, stood by him. Ron had been suspicious at first, thinking Harry might have found a way around the age line, but when Harry explained that his request to withdraw had been refused, Ron chose to believe him, though he admitted to feeling a little jealous. Hermione was quietly steady as ever. Meanwhile, Professor Wisen kept looking for any sign that someone had tampered with the goblet. He checked Moody again, searching for anything out of the ordinary, but found nothing. Chapter 300, Roskin and the Thunderbird. Mid-November came quickly. In a clearing at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, a special care of magical creatures lesson was in progress. Today the class was not just Hogwarts students. Dozens of Beauxbatons pupils in their pale blue uniforms were mixed among them. Roskin was there with them, Professor Vincent had led a herd of unicorns out from the forest for everyone to observe. After a while, a few more fluffy foals trotted out to join the group. Unicorns were notoriously shy and kept away from humans, so seeing a whole herd was a rare sight. The Beauxbatons students, almost all girls, looked astonished. As Professor Vincent had guessed, the unicorns were unusually comfortable around the Beauxbatons girls. They were especially smitten with Gabrielle Delacour, Fleur's little sister. Gabrielle resembled Fleur in every way: long, silver hair like a cascade and bright, silvery eyes, and probably because she had a quarter Vila bloodline, or simply because she was so young, the unicorns crowded around her happily while she hugged a foal. Professor Vincent watched her with something like fondness. "Is Gabrielle already at Beauxbaton?" he murmured. "I thought their admission age was the same as Hogwarts, 11. "She isn't old enough for school yet," Roskin said lightly. Fleur insisted she come and Madame Maxime agreed. "Everyone knows she'll go to Beauxbatons when she's old enough, so they made an exception." Roskin shrugged. "Top students tend to get a little preferential treatment." Vincent nodded and looked back at Gabrielle. Roskin sighed. "Fleur doesn't have time to look after her, so I've been on childcare duty." A flash of light cut across the horizon, followed by a low, vibrating cry that made everyone glance up. "Is it going to rain?" one of the students asked. Confused, although the sky was overcast, it held no rain. Professor Vincent smiled at Roskin. "An old friend is coming," he said. A small gray dot appeared far off and closed the distance with astonishing speed. As it drew nearer, Roskin recognized the shape: Thunderbird. It spread enormous wings, tiny arcs of electricity danced across its cloud-gray feathers, and each mighty flap sent gusts of wind through the clearing. When it saw Vincent waving, it folded its wings and descended, landing elegantly before him with an excited cry. "Lay!" several of the Hogwarts students shouted. Hogwarts pupils were used to Lay's occasional visits, and most of the Beauxbatons girls had already heard about the Thunderbird from Roskin, so after a quick look, everyone returned to the unicorns. Professor Vincent had just said that, if the unicorns allowed it, students could take a few tail hairs, so they were busy picking out foals to approach. Vincent smoothed the feathers on Lay's head and turned to Roskin. "You remember it, don't you?" "Of course," Roskin said, a little surprised. "I thought you'd released it back into the wild. Adult Thunderbirds rarely follow a wizard for long." "Really?" Vincent blinked. "The Thunderbirds I raised all flew off once they reached adulthood," Roskin explained. "They went to find a place that suited them. That's their nature. I thought they liked me, but apparently I was just a temporary babysitter." She shrugged. "I don't mind. I respect what the creatures want." Vincent stroked Lay's neck thoughtfully. "Did you hear that, Lay? If you want to leave, you may go anytime." Lay cocked its head, pecked Vincent's shoulder lightly with its beak, then shook its head in a manner uncannily like a human's. It seemed content to keep the regular meals, and its nest in the Thunderwood. The class bell rang. The unicorn herd melted back into the trees and Lay lifted into the sky, vanishing as swiftly as it had arrived. Students left with handfuls of prize hair. Some had managed to collect 2 or 3 shimmering tail hairs each. Before she could be whisked away by the other pupils, Gabrielle ran up to Professor Vincent and Roskin, still smiling. She stood on tiptoe and pressed a tiny, luminous unicorn hair into Vincent's hand. "This is the prettiest one," she said. "Thank you, Gabrielle," Vincent said, taken aback, and accepted it. Gabrielle turned her attention to Roskin. "Let's go, Professor. My sister must be waiting." "Don't rush," Roskin murmured, taking Gabrielle's hand. She leaned close and spoke quietly to Vincent. "You probably noticed Fleur's absence. Madame Maxime is giving her special training." Vincent raised an eyebrow. Roskin's expression grew serious. "You ought to give your champion some special training, too," she said. "Otherwise, you'll lose the competition." "You care a great deal about that, don't you?" Vincent said with a chuckle. "I'm a little of a Beauxbatons professor as well," Roskin replied, half joking, half serious. "A bit of urgency never hurts. You'll want Hogwarts to win, won't you?" With that, she took Gabrielle, and they headed back toward the castle. Professor Vincent stood a moment, thinking. If the Triwizard events remained as before, with Harry's present abilities, it shouldn't be a problem. Cedric would likely manage too. Still, extra training would not be wasted. An idea, small and practical, began to take shape in his mind.